One book, one extraordinary life. 48 chapters of saints, science, and the search for God.
I'm Kai,
And I'm Maya.
and this is our take on Autobiography of a Yogi, chapter by chapter. Two boys in English suits board a train at Howrah Station and hand their leather shoes to the cab driver as a parting gift. They're headed for the Himalayas. They have no plan, no permission, and absolutely no idea that Mukunda's brother is already one step behind them.
Chapter 4, My Interrupted Flight Toward the Himalayas. And this is the chapter where Mukunda finally does what he's been threatening to do since chapter 1. He runs, for real this time, with a friend, a route, and the divinest melancholy driving him forward.
So here's how it starts. Mukunda has a friend named Amar Mitter, and they've been talking about the Himalayas the way other boys their age might talk about cricket or school holidays. But for Mukunda, this isn't daydreaming, it's an ache. He's been stopped once already, dragged back from Nainital by Ananta, but the pull hasn't faded. If anything, it's gotten stronger.
And they recruit a third companion, a cousin named Jatinda. 3 boys, all dressed in European clothing to avoid suspicion. They board a train at Howrah Station, and Yogananda mentions this wonderful detail. They gave their leather shoes to the cab driver as a present, which is both generous and slightly impractical considering they're about to cross northern India.
And Ananta, the ever-vigilant elder brother, figures out what happened almost immediately. He goes to Amar's school the next morning and discovers Amar has vanished from his classroom. Then he goes to Amar's house and finds the father climbing into a carriage moaning, "My son will not ride with me to his school this morning. He has disappeared."
And a brother coachman provides the key detail. I heard from a brother coachman that your son and 2 others, dressed in European suits, boarded the train at Howrah Station. They made a present of their leather shoes to the cab driver. So now Ananta has 3 clues: the timetable, the trio of boys, and the English clothing.
Because here's the thing Amar forgot to do. Mukunda had specifically told him not to leave marked timetables in his house, but Amar did exactly that, and Ananta found it with all the cities underlined. So he fires off telegrams to station officials in every city Amar had marked. 3 Bengali boys in English clothes running away from home toward Hardwar via Mughal Sarai. Please detain them until my arrival. Ample reward for your services.
Meanwhile, the boys are on the train, completely unaware of the net closing around them. And at one of the stations, a European station agent approaches them waving a telegram. And here's where one of the funniest scenes in the entire book unfolds.
The agent asks, "Are you running away from home in anger?" And Mukunda, choosing his words carefully, says, "No." He was glad the man's choice of words permitted him to make an emphatic reply. Not anger, but divinest melancholy was responsible for his unconventional behavior, which is technically true. He's not angry, he's spiritually compelled. There's a difference.
And then the official turns to Amar, and the duel of wits that follows is just brilliant. "Where is the 3rd boy?" the agent demands, injecting a full ring of authority into his voice. "Come on, speak the truth."
And Amar, cool as anything, says, "Sir, I notice you are wearing eyeglasses. Can't you see that we are only 2? And then smiles impudently. "I am not a magician. I cannot conjure up a 3rd companion."
The official is noticeably disconcerted, so he tries a new approach. "What is your name?" And Amar says, "I am called Thomas. I am the son of an English mother and a converted Christian Indian father." And then, pointing to Mukunda, adds, "I call him Thompson."
Thomas and Thompson, 2 Bengali boys in English clothes claiming to be half English Christians, and Mukunda is trying so hard not to laugh. He says his inward mirth had reached a zenith. He unceremoniously made for the train, whistling for departure, and the official, who was credulous and obliging enough, put them into a European compartment. It evidently pained him to think of 2 half-English boys traveling in the section allotted to natives.
After the official's polite exit, Mukunda lay back on the seat and laughed uncontrollably, and Amar wore an expression of blithe satisfaction at having outwitted a veteran European official. I love that Yogananda preserves this scene in such detail. It's not just comedy. It's 2 boys asserting their freedom against an entire colonial apparatus, using wit instead of confrontation.
But the 3rd companion, Jatinda, the cousin, he's already gone. He abandoned them at Burdwan Station early in the journey, and we find out later why. Jatinda's account is one of the funniest confessions in the book. He says he started for the Himalayas in a buoyant spiritual mood, filled with inspiration at the prospect of meeting the masters. But as soon as Mukunda said, "During our ecstasies in the Himalayan caves, tigers will be spellbound and sit around us like tame pussies," Jatinda's spirits froze. Beads of perspiration formed on his brow.
What then, he thought? If the vicious nature of the tigers be not changed through the power of our spiritual trance, shall they treat us with the kindness of house cats? And then comes the line that just floors me every time.
In my mind's eye, I already saw myself the compulsive inmate of some tiger's stomach, entering there not at once with the whole body, but by installments of its several parts.
By installments of its several parts, Jatinda is imagined being eaten piece by piece, and Ananta later tracked Jatinda down, invited him to dinner in a very friendly manner, and then led him straight to a police station. So Jatinda didn't escape consequences either. But back to the main adventure. The train carries them through the night. At another station, Amar is awakened by another questioning official, and he too fell victim to the hybrid charms of Thomas and Thompson. They arrive at dawn in Hardwar, with the majestic mountains looming invitingly in the distance. Their first act was to change into native costume, because Ananta had somehow penetrated their European disguise. A premonition of capture weighed on Mukunda's mind, and he was right to worry. They try to board another train to proceed north to Rishikesh, a soil long hallowed by feet of many masters. Mukunda gets on the train, but Amar lags behind on the platform and is brought to an abrupt halt by a shout from a policeman.
Their unwelcome guardian escorts them to a station bungalow and takes charge of their money. And this is where something extraordinary happens, because the officer holding them, learning that their destination was the Himalayas, decides to tell them a story. And this story is, it stopped me cold when I first read it.
The officer says, "I see you are crazy about saints. You will never meet a greater man of God than the one I saw only yesterday." He and his brother officer had been patrolling by the Ganges 5 days earlier, on a sharp lookout for a certain murderer who was known to masquerading as a sadhu to rob pilgrims.
They spotted a figure matching the description. The man ignored their command to stop. They ran to overpower him, and the officer, approaching from behind, wielded his axe with tremendous force. The man's right arm was severed almost completely from his body.
And the stranger, without outcry or any glance at the ghastly wound, continued his swift pace. As they jumped in front of him, he spoke quietly, "I am not the murderer you are seeking."
The officer was deeply mortified. He prostrated himself at the saint's feet, implored his pardon, and offered his turban cloth to staunch the heavy spurts of blood. And the saint said with complete calm, "Son, that was just an understandable mistake on your part. Run along and don't reproach yourself. The beloved mother is taking care of me."
And then he pushed his dangly arm into its stump, and it adhered. The blood inexplicably ceased to flow. He told the officer, "Come to me under yonder tree in 3 days, and you will find me fully healed. Thus you will feel no remorse."
3 days later, the officer and his brother went to the designated spot. The sadhu was there. They examined his arm. It bore no scar or trace of hurt. None. An arm nearly severed by an axe, completely restored in 3 days. And the sadhu blessed them and departed for the Himalayan solitudes.
And Mukunda and Amar, sitting in their captivity, hear this and feel something complicated. They lament that they had missed the great yogi who could forgive his persecutor in such a Christ-like way. India, Yogananda reflects, materially poor for the last 2 centuries, yet has an inexhaustible fund of divine wealth. Spiritual skyscrapers may occasionally be encountered by the wayside, even by worldly men like this policeman.
And there's a wonderful irony here. The officer was probably more fortunate than them. He had met an illumined saint without effort. Their earnest search had ended not at the feet of a master, but in a coarse police station, so near the Himalayas and yet in captivity.
Mukunda, undeterred, whispers to Amar, "Let us slip away when opportunity offers. We can go on foot to holy Rishikesh." But Amar's courage has evaporated along with their money. If we started a track over such dangerous jungle land, we should finish not in the city of saints, but in the stomachs of tigers.
The stomachs of tigers again. Between Jatinda's installment plan and Amar's jungle prediction, everyone in this chapter seems to have a vivid imagination when it comes to being eaten. But I think there's something real underneath the comedy. These boys genuinely believed that spiritual attainment could tame wild animals, that consciousness could override nature. And Mukunda never wavers from that conviction, even when everyone around dims.
That's exactly right. And it connects to something Yogananda says earlier in the chapter. When Amar and he lamented missing the great yogi by the Ganges, Yogananda reflects that India, materially poor for the last 2 centuries, yet has an inexhaustible fund of divine wealth. Spiritual skyscrapers may occasionally be encountered by the wayside, even by worldly men like this policeman.
So Ananta and Amar's brother arrive after 3 days. Amar greets his relative with affectionate relief, but Mukunda is unreconciled. He wants to keep going. And Ananta, wisely, doesn't scold him. He speaks soothingly. "I understand how you feel. All I ask of you is to accompany me to Benares to meet a certain saint and go on to Calcutta to visit your grieving father for a few days. Then you can resume your search here for a master." It's actually a brilliant negotiation. Ananta doesn't say you can never go. He says come home first, see father, and then you can come back. and Mukunda agrees. They travel to Benares, where Ananta has prearranged a meeting with a pundit and his son, who are supposed to dissuade Mukunda from the monastic path.
And the son engages Mukunda in lengthy philosophic discourse, professing to have clairvoyant knowledge of his future. He tells Mukunda he will meet continual misfortune and be unable to find God if he insists on deserting his ordinary responsibilities. You cannot work out your past karma without worldly experiences.
And Mukunda fires back with Krishna's own words from the Bhagavad Gita. Even he with the worst of karma, who ceaselessly meditates on me, quickly loses the effects of his past bad actions. Becoming a high-souled being, he soon attains perennial peace. Arjuna, know this for certain. The devotee who puts his trust in me never perishes.
But the young man's forceful prognostications had slightly shaken his confidence. And in this moment of doubt, Mukunda does something crucial. He prays silently. Please solve my bewilderment and answer me, right here and now, if thou dost desire me to lead the life of a renunciate or a worldly man.
And right then, he notices a sadhu of noble countenance standing just outside the compound. The stranger had evidently overheard the spirited conversation. He calls Mukunda to his side, and Mukunda feels a tremendous power flowing from his calm eyes.
The sadhu says, "Son, don't listen to that ignoramus. In response to your prayer, the Lord tells me to assure you that your sole path in this life is that of the renunciate." A direct answer to a direct prayer. And the timing is extraordinary, you know? Mukunda asks God for clarity, and the answer walks up to the fence within seconds.
The so-called clairvoyant is furious. "Come away from that man," he shouts from the courtyard. But the saintly guide just raises his hand in blessing and slowly departs. And the pundit, watching him go, says, "That sadhu is just as crazy as you are. I heard that he too has left his home in a vague search for God."
Mukunda turns away and tells Ananta he will not engage in further discussion with their hosts. They leave for Calcutta. And at home, his father touchingly requests that he at least finish high school before resuming his roving. And then the father does something beautiful. He arranges for a saintly pundit named Swami Kebalananda to come to the house as Mukunda's Sanskrit tutor.
And here's the twist the father didn't see coming. Kebalananda was an exalted disciple of Lahiri Mahasaya. The father hoped to satisfy Mukunda's religious yearnings through a learned philosopher, but instead, his new teacher fanned the embers of his God aspiration. The tables were subtly turned.
Kebalananda was extraordinary. Luxuriant curls framed his handsome face. His dark eyes were guileless with the transparency of a child's. All his movements were marked by a restful deliberation. Ever gentle and loving, he was firmly established in the infinite consciousness.
And Kebalananda shared stories of Lahiri Mahasaya that gave Mukunda the deepest understanding yet of what a true guru is. He described Lahiri's Benares home, where the guru sat on a backless wooden seat, disciples garlanded around him in a semicircle. His eyes sparkled and danced with the joy of the divine, ever half closed, peering through the inner telescopic orb into a sphere of eternal bliss.
And the description of being in Lahiri's presence is remarkable. An indescribable peace blossomed within me at the master's glance. I was permeated with his fragrance, as though from a lotus of infinity. To be with him, even without exchanging a word for days, was experience which changed my entire being.
That's the guru-disciple transmission in its purest form, not teaching through words, teaching through presence. And Kebalananda shared stories of miracles too. A blind disciple named Ramu who had never seen the sun. Kebalananda encouraged him to ask Lahiri for help, and Lahiri characteristically deflected at first. "Someone has connived to put me in a difficult position. I have no healing power."
But when Ramu persisted, saying the infinite one within the guru could certainly heal, Lahiri relented. "That is indeed different, Ramu. God's limit is nowhere." He touched Ramu's forehead at the point between the eyebrows and said, "Keep your mind concentrated there and frequently chant the name of the prophet Rama for 7 days. The splendor of the sun shall have a special dawn for you."
And in 1 week, Ramu saw for the first time in his life. Born blind, and in 7 days of practice, he beheld the fair face of nature. And here's what I find so important about that story. Lahiri didn't claim the healing power as his own. He directed it through Ramu's own faith and practice. The guru was the catalyst, but Ramu's devotion was the soil.
And Kebalananda shared something else that stayed with me. Lahiri Mahasaya was no bookish interpreter of the scriptures, he said. Effortlessly, he dipped into the divine library. If asked to explain the different planes of consciousness mentioned in the ancient texts, Lahiri would smilingly assent. "I will undergo those states and presently tell you what I perceive." He didn't recite from memory. He experienced the states directly and reported back. That's the difference between scholarship and realization.
That's extraordinary. Most teachers explain what they've read. Lahiri demonstrated what he lived, and the master never counseled slavish belief, Ananta said. Words are only shells, Lahiri taught. When conviction of God's presence through your own joyous contact in meditation. That's such a radical instruction. Don't believe because I tell you. Find out for yourself.
And Ananta concluded with something that ties the whole chapter together. He said it was evident in all miracles performed by Lahiri Mahasaya that he never allowed the ego principle to consider itself a causative force. By perfection of resistless surrender, the master enabled the prime healing power to flow freely through him.
Resistless surrender. That's the opposite of what Mukunda has been doing all chapter, right? He's been forcing, running, scheming, and the lesson sitting right in front of him, delivered through Ananta, is that the deepest power comes through surrender, not force.
And the chapter closes with this perfect line. I never became a Sanskrit scholar. Ananta taught me a diviner syntax. The father wanted him to learn grammar. Instead, he learned the language of the soul.
And next time, Mukunda encounters a saint who can do something that defies every law of physics he's ever known, a man who materializes the scent of any flower from thin air, the perfume saint.
And if you think perfume from nowhere sounds like a parlor trick, wait until you hear what Yogananda actually thinks about it. His reaction is not what you'd expect. See you next time.